Good morning and welcome back to the program where we talk about the fascinating world of New York City real estate and the people behind all of it. I would like to welcome my listeners and viewers in the United States and all around the world. I am Vince Rocco. It is Tuesday morning here in New York City, so let's go behind the headlines and inside everything real estate. This is Talking New York Real Estate. And at this hour, in uncertain markets such as the New York City real estate market, during periods of economic volatility or shifting industry trends, buyers and sellers face heightened ambiguity and risk. Fluctuating interest rates, changes in consumer preferences, and global economic conditions can all contribute to a climate of unpredictability. In such environments, location becomes even more crucial, as certain neighborhoods may prove more resilient or susceptible to market fluctuations. Affordability becomes a pressing concern for many, as economic uncertainty can impact purchase power and access to financing options. Additionally, uncertainty can create opportunities for those with the flexibility and resources to capitalize on market inefficiencies or distressed properties. Navigating uncertain markets require careful analysis, patience, and a willingness to adapt to changing conditions, as well as a thorough understanding of the underlying factors driving that volatility. We will have all that and so much more as Talking New York Real Estate gets underway on this very busy Tuesday morning. And in the news this morning, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to question New York's decades-old rent control system, turning away two appeals from apartment building owners. The rebuff last week ends months of deliberations over the cases, which had been fully briefed since last September. The court as a whole gave no exceptions for either the rejection or the unusual long delay. The decision follows the October 2nd rejection of an appeal that raised related issues. The challengers said a state law governing 1 million units in New York City unconstitutionally takes private property without compensation. The New York Rent Stabilization Law, which dates back to 1969, is among the most tenant-friendly in the nation. It requires landlords to renew leases except in limited circumstances, including a failure to pay rent, and lets family members take over a lease if they have lived in the unit for more than 2 years. And the median rent price for one-bedroom and two-bedroom units in New York City both went down from December of 23 to last month in January, making the first time since last May that these prices went down month over month, according to a report by the real estate firm Zumper. The median rent for one-bedroom units in New York City decreased 2.9% from $4,161 to $4,040. Over the same period of time, two-bedroom units saw the median rent drop 6% from $47.98 to $45.10. Renters have more leverage right now than any other time in history. Now is the time to negotiate existing leases or score a deal on a new apartment. And Google officially opened its newest New York City office. What once was a freight terminal in the industrial sector of Lower Manhattan is now a high-performing modern workspace for thousands of employees. Google announced these plans back in 2018 to expand its footprint to Hudson Square, leasing properties at 315 and 345 Hudson Street, in addition to St. John's Terminal, as part of a 1.7 million square foot campus in the neighborhood. In 2021, the tech giant bought the historic structure for $2.1 billion, one of the most expensive office building sales ever recorded. And a Greek Revival federal-style townhouse at 21 West 11th Street on a postcard-perfect Greenwich Village block has had the distinction of being the official residence of the president of the New School in Manhattan for over 4 decades. As mentioned in a recent New York Times feature highlighting the listing, the elegant home, like many similar university residences, is considered by some to be a symbol of opulence. The home is now on the market for $20 million. The 20-foot wide single-family townhouse is currently the school's houses the interim president, Donna Shalala, who was a former Congress member and a former Secretary of Health and Human Services under Bill Clinton. The new school purchased that property for $900,000 in 1984. Since then, 4 university presidents have called it home. And as we previously recorded, Annie Leibovitz listed her Upper West Side co-op for sale. Now we report that it has sold for nearly 24% over the asking price. The duplex, located in the star-studded building at 88 Central Park West, fetched $10,625,000, roughly $2 million more than its asking price. But the sale was still a loss for Leibovitz, who paid about $11,250,000, isn't that a shame, for the home in 2014. The building is known for its high-profile residents, including Robert De Niro, Paul Simon, and Sting, as Curb first reported. And with me today are Steve Kliegerman, president of Brown Harris Stevens Development Marketing, and now the new host of the podcast Breaking Ground here on the More Network. Michael Vargas, President and CEO of Vanderbilt Appraisal Company, Scott Harris, Brown Harris Stevens, and Peter Graubard from Graubard and Blumenfield. Okay, everybody, I want to start with just a couple of things from a market report that I read this morning. So contract activity saw a slight decline during the shortened holiday week, which was President's Week. The New York City Consumer Sentiment Index demand remains steady, which is always kind of perplexing to me, slightly surpassing the pre-pandemic average. This week, Manhattan saw 198 contracts signed, with Brooklyn 118. Meanwhile, and I was telling this to Peter earlier, supply faces downward pressure as we enter the traditionally busy spring listing season. With supply hovering at the lower end of a 4-year range, the balance of leveraging tilts from buyers now towards sellers. I haven't seen that yet either, as the local real estate markets heat up heading into the spring market. Scott, let me start with you as our resident superstar agent here. What are you seeing by way of potential more inventory, market changing from a buyer's market to a seller's market? I mean, what's the scoop here?
All right, I'll give you first, thanks for having me on again. But there are three things I'm seeing that I think are worth mentioning to in this moment. One is we're having lots of conversations with sellers. And it's not just sellers who are bringing their properties to market, but also the repricing. So We're seeing a lot of repricing.
Important.
And so anybody who hasn't sold their apartments are starting it's sort of that winter hangover into spring where they're like, I really want to sell. But in addition to that, we have a lot of new properties coming to market or coming back to the market that were maybe resting for a few months or a year or whatever.
I like that term, resting.
And then I think the more relevant, like real-time moment is that we're reaching out to lots and lots of properties. Hey, this looks like a good price. And within a week, it's got a contract out. So I would be very hesitant to call this a seller's market.
I would agree. I think there's some parity in the marketplace because of low supply, but I would not call it a seller's market. I still think buyers hold the keys. I think they hold the power still. Using interest rates obviously as one reason for it, but also we've been in an economic boom for a long time, right? And coming out of COVID, the market ran up tremendously. So it's only natural for things to settle a little bit, especially as interest rates rise up. But I agree with Scott. Anything that's priced properly is moving. And in new development, we reprice some apartments at 393 West End Avenue. We reprice some apartments at View at 368 3rd Avenue. And as soon as we altered prices, and we're not talking, well, in some instances large, but in some instances reasonable adjustments, traffic tripled and deals started to flow in.
I agree. 393 West End has been a great success, for us. But let me ask you, Scott, the conversations we have, with sellers on what Steve was saying and what you just said before, repricing, getting to that right price. Is that conversation getting any easier these days, or is it still kind of like tug of war? Well, my neighbor did get X amount of dollars more than you're asking me to get for mine. I mean, they don't necessarily want to understand what market conditions are all about from 1 year to the next, let alone 5 years back.
I think in our experience, the conversation's gotten a lot easier.
Okay.
We're the third agent for somebody. They're finally repricing at about 10%, and it's a beautiful apartment. But that is in combination with a totally new marketing approach. I think there's a lot of and I think justifiable feedback from sellers like, hey, what new are you going to do in addition to the price reduction? They want to understand the whole picture.
Right.
But I was talking to a broker Upper West Side. This is something that had been on the market for a year, and we were watching the price drop a little bit, and then all of a sudden, we get a call from a friend of a friend saying, I saw this a few months ago. I'm really interested. It's asking $3 million. I think it's worth $2.6 million, Scott. And really made the case. And we're like, okay, well, we'll talk to the agent and see what happened. They had been at this price for 4 months, and it was a great quote. He said, Scott, every listing has its day. And they had a bidding war after being on the market for 4 months, and it sold over the asking price. So the buyer who had reached out to us was very disappointed. But I think that lack of inventory is definitely, if somebody wants to buy a big apartment, there's not that much to look at. So I think it becomes kind of a stare down in some respects as we get closer to the spring, but by no means a seller's.
But I agree with you because of the lack of inventory, though. If you are priced correctly or sharply, whatever term you want to use, you're going to sell quickly, and you're probably going to get over the asking price or at least multiple interest. But Steve, let me ask you, because you deal, I always say location, 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 and in new development, your projects are all over the place. Are there any particular locations today for new dev that is selling faster than others, or are they kind of all, about the same?
That's a good question. The Upper West Side almost always does well because there's so little inventory. So I'd say the Upper West Side still is performing well. Actually, Morningside Heights is performing very well. And Upper Manhattan in general is performing well because, again, you're getting great product at a relative discount to south of 110th or 96th Street, depending on where your cutoff line is. We're seeing a lot of buyers coming actually to Midtown. Why? Because they want to be able to easily get to work. And most of these buyers are, I'd say, 25 to 35-year-olds. They're often getting assistance from their parents to purchase an apartment, and they want to be able to easily get to work in the morning because they are actually going to the office 3 to 4 days a week, and they're finding that, because they're used to working remote, commuting doesn't work for them anymore, so they really want to be able just to jump out of bed and go.
And there was a point in time, though, where Midtown, whether it was east or west, was always a little less expensive than some of the other heavy neighborhoods, downtown, of course,
right
below 14th Street, uptown, Upper East, Upper West. So where are we price-wise in the Midtown, location? Affordable for these people?
In new development, you're looking at things, anything from the high teens to the low 2,000s a square foot to the mid 2,000s a foot. But the interesting thing is also it's stretching over to 3rd and 2nd Avenue now, where, it was more like Lexington and West. Yep. Now they're willing to come east to get a little bit more for their money. Also, the views really open up as you get a little bit closer to the river. So, and a lot of people are looking to buy views because, you can change a lot of things about an apartment. One thing you can't change is its location in the building, right? So people are stretching a little bit to get a little bit higher floor as well to get those views. So when you ask what neighborhood, it's also what stratosphere.
Right.
Go
ahead.
Yeah, I'm finding that with the younger demographic, people buying their first apartments, it used to be, they had very particular neighborhoods in mind where they wanted to be, and now they sort of, and I think rightfully so, can rationalize being anywhere in Manhattan.
Yep.
Right. So now all of a sudden, Midtown East, that's a great neighborhood because I can get to work more easily. I don't have to commute downtown from the Upper East Side, which could take a half an hour and 45 minutes.
The new trains over there make it easier in that neighborhood.
Or the river. I have Riverview. There are always ways to wrap your head around the newer neighborhoods.
Yeah, and neighborhoods have changed too. There used to be restaurant deserts in the city. Now each area of the city has its pockets of restaurants, right? It has its pockets of decent grocery stores. There's more, Trader Joe's and Whole Foods and the likes throughout the city now. So I don't think people are as neighborhood specific unless there's another reason. So if they have children, maybe the school's in the area, so they want to be able to easily get their children to school, or maybe they have friends or relatives in a neighborhood and they want to be near their friends and relatives. But unless there's, a specific reason, I find people literally, and we also see they're looking in Brooklyn and they're looking in downtown Manhattan and Midtown, right? What you don't see a lot of is they're looking in the Upper East Side in Brooklyn or the Upper West Side in Brooklyn, although sometimes maybe if they're looking at Park Slope or Brooklyn Heights. But people are definitely less neighborhood specific because the city, I hate to say, has become a little generic.
You're absolutely correct, and I can go back to 15 or 16 years ago when I first started working for you in the new development division, and people, whatever project I was working on, I think the first one was Upper West Side, they came to that building because they wanted to be there.
Yeah.
They wanted to be on the Upper West Side, the Hudson, right? How could we forget the Hudson? And then 505 or wherever it was, they wanted to be in those locations. Now you're right, and the 2nd Avenue subway train on the east side has made all of that. They pushed everything. East of Lexington. It used to be everything west of Lexington was the place to be. Michael Vargas, so from your perspective, how are appraisals looking today? because in some cases, most cases, we still have pricing that's aspirational or that are too high. How are the appraisals coming in today? I remember, and Steve can back this up, way back in right after the 2008-2009 crisis. I mean, we were slammed with appraisals being in the basement, hundreds of thousands of dollars under, listing prices, whatever. It was a banking problem. We get that, but the appraisals were a mess. What do we look like today?
Well, I mean, just to start by addressing, the point about the direction of the market, whether it's a seller's market or a buyer's market, we've been in kind of an uncertain, fluctuating market for some period here. And I think that, as Steve was bringing up, sometimes it's not so much about where price direction's going, but where the behavior of buyers are changing and where the taste of buyers or their rationale for buying in certain areas. So, part of what we're trying to decipher is not just, who has the advantage, sellers or buyers, but really where are the buyers going? What are they attracted to? Are they coming back to work and thinking they don't want to commute, so they're going to live in Midtown? So those kind of, it's not necessarily an uncertain market, but an evolving market. And that's what I've been focused on in our appraisals, is really to figure out where the buyer's coming from, where are they going, and why are they going there. And sometimes it's not just related to price, but oftentimes it can be related to price.
Sure.
I think I've said for a while, since the mortgage rates went up, that we would see a lot more activity if prices came down 10 or 15%. And for most of 2022 and for all of 2023, I think sellers were just still holding on to the values that they thought were fair. And it took time for the buyers to either walk away and, leave things lingering on the market, and then for repricing conversations to begin this year. So, that's where, I was hoping to see, and I think you mentioned 198 contracts signed is a good level. We like to see it at like 250 is probably a good level of demand. And I think that if you reach that 250 versus the current level of inventory, you will start seeing a good level of price support where maybe sellers can begin to expect a little more from that period. But while we're under 200 contracts, we're probably more of at a stable market with an advantage to the buyers.
And let's talk a little bit about, and Scott, you can chime in on this too. I mean, we see market reports or whatever you want to call them every week, X amount of contracts signed this week, over $4 million. And I think people get skewed with activity based on that. I know agents certainly do. Oh my God, the market is booming. 26 contracts signed over $4 million. Well, that's great. However, how many properties are over $4 million when you look at the overall picture in Manhattan? It's not a good slice of what is actually happening in Manhattan or in all of New York City. Those are typically cash buyers, right? And if they can feel comfortable getting the price to what they want it to be, they'll buy. So yes, tons and tons of contracts at that price. I would say luxury, in my opinion, starts at 6 or 7 million. 4 million today, and I hate to say it, is nothing. When you look at the overall scheme of a townhouse today, I read in the news, $20 million. I mean, is anything worth $20 million? I mean, I love it, but I mean, come on now, really? What about buyer behavior?
Well, I think it's really important, and I try to say this all the time, like, not only is there a lot of noise in the news, but people really don't make those distinctions between the type. Right. And yes, at different price points, people do behave a little bit differently. At the high end, this is a want to have, right, not a have to have.
Show place.
They want, there are new developments that are crushing it because the combination of finish, location, size just really has worked. And then you can see other new developments that have lingered until they've repriced. So the buyer behavior I'm seeing, and I think it kind of brings a lot of what we're talking about together, there does seem to be kind of a reckoning in terms of the cost of carrying buildings. And I think a lot of buildings are starting to see their monthlies creep up. So I've seen buyers move and be open to other locations based on how much is the monthly in the building. If you have an apartment, we're bringing something on where it's like this crazy number, like a 2,500 square foot apartment that has a $900 a month maintenance. We're going to have 4,000 people coming through.
Absolutely.
And we have buyers who are like, I can either live in a townhouse in Harlem or I can live in a townhouse in Brooklyn, and the costs of the carry, the taxes and the charges really do matter. And we had another deal fall apart because the monthlies, upon due diligence, realized, oh my God, it's worse than we thought. It was already a high maintenance.
Gotta love
and
due
now,
diligence.
we went to the seller. We said, look, we need a haircut here. We need to drop the price by $150,000. It was like a $2.5 million purchase. And the seller is not living there, not in New York. Maybe they're in Florida. We were talking about Florida earlier. I don't know where the seller is, but he was just totally stubborn and said, I'm not reducing the price. But we can just see the monthlies going to a point where if the seller ever, the buyer decided to sell, there was going to be a real problem. So I think buyer behavior is very focused on, is there value? And that, I do think there's a certain amount of that, a large amount of that. And even at the high end. There's a focus on what's valuable to them, and I think for most buyers that overall
I have said for years,
is
and
a
I
big
work
deal.
with buyers, if you feel like you're getting the right value, and you can put your head on the pillow at the end of the night after you decide to go forward on a deal, and you feel comfortable, then the value for you is there. But also you have to look at the value somewhere down the road, because no one stays in their apartment, despite what they tell you, for 100 years. Okay. 3, 4, 5, 7 years, life changes, you're going to sell, upgrade, downgrade, whatever you're going to do. So make sure you can see some value in the future, but more importantly today. Peter.
Yes.
Go ahead. I wanted to ask you about behavior, but also in uncertain markets, what should buyers really consider when evaluating a location and then also an apartment? What do your buyers tell you when you're trying to do a deal with them or going through diligence? I mean, what are their concerns these days? We all know that we're in a very uncertain market. I mean, that can go in many different directions this year, and I believe it's going to go in a positive direction. But what do they need to be looking out for now to make them comfortable?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the buyer, right? On the class of buyer.
Correct.
On the financial class of buyer, right? The higher end buyers, I find when they talk to me, they always ask me, even though the agent is more of the expert on this, they always ask me, is this a good deal? Am I getting a good deal? I don't know.
All about the deal.
Right.
All about the deal.
I mean, when you're talking about between, 9.8 million and 9.3 million,
right.
You know what I mean, for an apartment,
right.
Are you getting a good deal? No. No. But no. The truth is that that's what they're focused on. They want to live in a particular neighborhood
100%.
where they want to live, and so they're looking for the best deal they can get for what they want. But the lower end buyers, the first time buyers, the second time buyers, the family buyers, they're always most focused on what it's going to cost me per month to live here.
Okay, thank you.
And therefore, the due diligence comes into play. How often does maintenance go up? Mm-hmm. What kind of assessments are coming in the future?
And by the way, maintenance has been increasing the last 2 years significantly percentage-wise, okay?
Where do you think interest rates are going? What type of capital improvements is the building planning on doing? Is there going to be a local law 11 coming down the road, and how much is that going to cost me? So it very much focused on what is it going to cost me per month, and with interest rates being where they are as compared to what people were used to and what these first-time buyers had heard, they were only 3 years ago, they get concerned. Mostly about monthly cost and trying to predict what will happen in this particular co-op or condominium going forward.
Yeah, I think people are very, very attuned to monthly cost because, interest rate, if they take a fixed rate mortgage, even if it's at 6% or 7% today, at least they know what it is. The unknown is what really freaks people out. So I agree. Stability and maintenance are common charges. In new development, what are the real estate taxes really going to be in 2 or 3 years, right? And we work really hard with our developers to make sure that those real estate tax assessments in the offering plan are accurate. But you still are at the whim and will of the assessor's office at the end of the day. So looking at things like that. So for instance, we just got a huge tax reduction at the Vandewater, 32%. And when you add on the 17.5% co-op and condo abatement, it's closer to 42%.
Wow.
Our taxes went down for 2024. As soon as we announced that, we were flooded with buyers. I think we did 8 deals in like 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
You know, because buyers are really worried about their monthlies, because you can't control that. Insurance rates have gone up 40, 50% across the country. Sometimes, I mean, Florida, it's like 300%, right? You know, so insurance has gone up. Now you have prevailing wage laws in New York City. So everyone's basically paying union wages to their staff and everyone who services the building in that building. So, you know, for guys like Peter, there's a lot more due diligence that has to be done to read board minutes, to take a look at financials, to make sure that the building is stable, because those stable buildings, I'm sure, Scott, you find sell better than buildings, you know, that are having constant assessments.
And the developers, you can tell, are focused on the concern of the buyer's monthly cost, because while they're reluctant to negotiate price so much, they are very, willing to negotiate closing costs,
Right.
And carrying charges. So we see a lot of developers these days offering incentives where we'll give you a year free common charges, or a year and a half or 2 years free common charges. And that's very attractive to a buyer who's coming in,
who's focused on monthlies.
Who's focused on monthlies, and especially in the first year or so of ownership. That's a good incentive.
It also gives them an opportunity to kind of replenish their savings, right? Because if they're not paying those common charges or taxes, they can put that money back away.
And the type of buyer
Hold the thought a minute. We got to take a quick break. We're coming right back. We are on the More Network. This is Talking New York Real Estate. Don't go anywhere.
This beautiful set here at Studio 1873 is brought to you by the Everset. The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
Okay, we are back. Michael, I cut you off, unfortunately, before break.
Yeah, I was going to
What's your
say, the financial class of buyer that, Peter's talking about, that makes up probably 80 or 85% of the market. When we talk about, sales under 3.5%, or sales under 3.5 million make up like 85% of the market.
Correct.
And
that's what I was getting at earlier.
Yeah,
Right.
and so when that's such a significant piece begins to be worried about, it probably started with worried about costs everywhere, inflation, and then monthly, housing costs. That's why sellers could not get the prices that they were hoping to get, is because there's just too much concern on the part of buyers. That concern can dissipate during a booming economy. When you think, your prospects for your job and your earnings and your stock market portfolio is all moving positively, you don't worry about those things. But in the kind of environment we are now, when there's so much focus on that, that's why it's difficult for, sellers to achieve the values that they think were fair, and that they probably need to be down, 10 or 15%.
And yet it seems to me that it's set up for right around the time that the sellers finally get used to the idea of lowering prices, which is about now. It'll hit when interest rates come down, and then suddenly that'll force prices back up. So they won't even have the opportunity to learn that lesson, it seems like.
We've been in a situation for a year and a half, maybe almost 2 years, with interest rates climbing and climbing and climbing. Recently, the Fed announced in December that they were going to be dropping 3 times this year, 4 times next year, whatever. And then last month he said, we're not dropping right now. Maybe come around May or June. We've all been in this business long enough to understand that the media, as we talked about before, or the press, makes buyers and also sellers a little crazy sometimes, because you don't know what to believe. Hey, I'm, uptick in marketplace in December, January, because we're going to be lowering interest rates. Now, all of a sudden, we're not going to do that just yet, but we're not raising them, but we're not lowering them. But all of a sudden, buyers kind of slow down a little bit. What are the economic conditions out there and that are stopping buyers, other than inflation? Because I think inflation sometimes is kind of overused, although when you look at prices of everything. But what is really the factors that are stopping buyers for any and all of the reasons above, for actually going out there and taking it? Is it really interest rates, or is it just global conditions, or is it all of the above? I mean, I don't know. I can't put my finger on it.
There's it's sort of whether you're kind of a present tense focused person or a future tense focused person, and we work with buyers kind of in both camps. But the future focused person is interested in, well, mortgage rates are definitely trending down. Maybe not in the last few weeks, but they're trending down.
They are.
And so if you're looking at the directionality going, look, I can buy now, maybe it's a little more than I want to spend, but I know I'm going to refinance in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. They're feeling good about that. And then you sort of layer on the psychology of someone who is more present tense focused and saying, well, I can tell the prices are lower than what these people paid. You know, they see themselves as getting a discount on the purchase price. So there's some maybe cold comfort, but certainly some comfort. But what's keeping people away is just sort of this nagging feeling like, well, maybe prices are going to come down. And in this inventory constrained environment, that isn't really proving true, right? It's just not proving true. So it takes a little educating for buyers to sort of get themselves out of that. And if I can't get people out so they can get themselves educated, you're kind of at an impasse.
But what I've been saying for 22 years, that, you know, the length of time I'm in the business, is everybody always says to me, and I heard it this past weekend, you know, visiting family, oh, prices are going to come down. Prices have to come down. They're going to come down. I'm not going to do anything until they come down. I think that's just a buyer's mentality, right? No matter where they are, forward thinking or not, it's just what they want to see happen.
Right.
But like I always say, when we flip to a seller's market and all of a sudden, you know, prices don't go down, they start to go up again, what happens to the buyers? They're buying in droves because they're afraid the price is going to go even higher. But what happens in a buyer's market when it's on your side?
Yeah. I think it's a difficult time for a buyer also because we are in a relatively inventory constrained environment. When you don't have enough things to compare things to, it's really hard to make a buying decision, right? Like if there were only 2 or 3 car companies, people would have a lot harder time buying a car than when there's 20 car companies, right? Because you have options, and then you can play one against the other. You know, also, I do believe we're going to see prices rise in the future because there's nothing in the pipeline. There are, give or take, in Manhattan, 3,000 new condo apartments coming over the next 3 to 5 years. That's the lowest pipeline of inventory we've seen in decades. Yeah. Okay, and in Brooklyn, it's like less than 1,700. I mean, it's pathetic. So
what's the reason for that?
Well, there's a number of reasons for that. Number one, coming out of COVID, there was very little development going on, right? Because no one was really looking at that. Number two, in a rising interest rate environment, it's a lot harder for a developer to make the numbers work because they were used to paying 5, 6, maybe 7%, maybe. Now they're paying 11, 12%, right, for the same money, and the cost of construction has gone up. Yeah. So the cost of everything has gone up. So sites that developers have been sitting on where they had pro forma, let's say their all-in number was going to be $1,200 a square foot. Now they're looking at $1,500 a square foot, but they're still looking at the same exit numbers, and they don't work. We're going to see price appreciation going forward. It has to happen because the laws of supply and demand still do work. The other thing that's going to help push the market, I believe, in a positive direction as far as activity is we did see about 6 to 8 months of lackluster absorption. And for 30 years, I've had the philosophy about the New York and American consumer that they only can hold on so long before they start to spend money. And we're starting to see it now. Open houses are busier. There's more buying activity out there. They haven't maybe made the commitment to buy, but they're getting close to making the commitment to buy because money's burning a hole in their pocket, and they have to move on with their lives. You know, they may have gotten a new job. They need to live in a different location. Their family size may have gone up or down, and they want to live in a different place. People's lives change, and people need to move. Also, rents, although I know that rents the last maybe month or two have trended a little bit downwards, but rents in brand new buildings coming out this year, next year, you're going to be looking at $100 to $110 a square foot as the new norm for new development rentals in Manhattan.
New rentals.
So think about what that means for your 650 square foot one bedroom. Okay? That's going to push people to the buy side.
Can I say one quick thing? I just want to touch on buyer behavior is very dependent on the size. So first time of year, people are still getting educated. So we're starting to, for the last few weeks, we've seen those buyers, they love it. They're still seeing more things. They love it. They're still seeing more things. So like they're not ready, to Steve's point, but the one-bedroom buyers, there's just so much to see. So like they just don't know. There is that amount of like fear of missing out, and they just want to make sure they're seeing enough to get educated. And in a low inventory environment, that's just harder, extra hard to do. And for these first-time buyers, you know, it's scary anyway. So it's like compound. But you know, I agree with where Steven said the market's
going. Can I
going.
ask Steve a quick question, since he's the new development expert? You know, certainly the state and local government has not been the friend to the developer lately. Do you see that having to change? Because you know,
Excellent question.
Well, I mean, there has to be a change in the what was the 421A, whatever the new tax abatement will be to build rental properties, because developers in New York City just simply cannot afford full taxes and be able to supply housing. In addition, it's crushing the affordable housing market, because if you're not building for market, then you're not building affordable. So it's a double whammy. But the other thing that's crushing it is the, you know, things like prevailing wage, things like, you know, increased cost, things like you know, for the most part, other than Vanderwater, most buildings real estate taxes go up every year. At some point, there's a point of resistance, and the city and state governments have to align and have to get on board with being reasonable and rational about passing on all these expenses and putting the entire, you know, basically burden of carrying the city on the back of real estate. It just doesn't work. So, you know, the city's done a little bit, you know, with the state. We're working on these office to residential potential opportunities. They have this conversion, office to resi conversion accelerator program, and we spoke to them about that 2 weeks ago in the mayor's office, and they're very helpful. But they're not magicians. They can't change legislation tomorrow. They can get you in front of the right people. They can help expedite things. But we need some reasonable governance, both at the city and state and even more local level, right? And until we get that, we're going to have a housing problem.
Let me ask you, Steve, on the new development side, then we're going to talk about a presidential election year. On the new development side, is there any borough right now that's hotter than others? I mean, we're all over the place, I get it.
I mean, Brooklyn's still pretty hot. You know, I mean, there's very little
inventory.
inventory.
Earlier, though, the
you know,
low inventory.
Yeah,
and
low
not much coming
inventory
out.
and a little bit lower cost, although Brooklyn's kind of getting very close on a per square foot basis in many areas to Manhattan now, particularly the better, I'd say, the more convenient neighborhoods in Brooklyn. But Brooklyn's still pretty hot. Queens is heating up. You know, Queens, no one ever talked about Queens, right? Which is a massive borough. Astoria, Flushing, Jackson Heights, Forest Hills, these neighborhoods are seeing more construction and they're seeing more absorption, and I think you're going to continue to see that. And the Bronx is coming along. It's not coming along as quickly as everyone had thought, although I didn't really think it would come along as quickly, but it is moving along. Mott Haven is starting to fill up, and you're starting to see even some condo development there. So, you know, but I'd say Brooklyn is still really hot, and Queens is starting to come along.
Presidential election year, gentlemen. There's always, you know, both sides of the coin there. You know, people freak out during president, and it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on, who you're voting for, whatever. It's just the thought of it's a presidential election year. Oh, my God, I'm frozen in place. I can't move. So, again, everybody has a different opinion. Michael, what do you think is going to be the effect of this year's election, 2024?
Well, you know, I looked at some data going back, you know, several elections, and there's usually not a price impact, you know, related or correlated with an election year, but there is a drop off
going up or down.
Right.
Okay.
There was an impact, I think, in the last 4 cycles on sales volume. And that wasn't necessarily just directly related to the fact that it was an election year, but there was other stuff going on, you know. I mean, you can go back, you know, obviously 2020 was really an impact from COVID in this market, especially for sales volume dropping. You know, going back to 2016, volume also dropped, but prices, you know, were relatively strong because I think the economy was in a strong position, even though there was a lot of, you know, kind of volatility in the market. So what we're being told is that this will be an election like no other, right? Correct. So I think, you know, you're probably going to expect we were talking before about buyer behavior. What's keeping the buyers, away or not, motivated to get into the market? And I think part of it is just general volatility. Is that whether it's volatility in, stock market is at an all-time high, but then you think it could crash at any moment. Your Bitcoin's at 50,000, but it could go to 10,000 in a month or two. There's this, this kind of thought, that kind of pervades the market sometimes, that things are not okay, that things could change at any moment. And that kind of volatility, if it's related to, a very difficult election year, is the kind of thing that can paralyze someone who wants to go out there and potentially buy something.
And probably should. And, for the person here who's not numbers oriented or who gets really frustrated with the fluctuations of the markets, I look at everything as you just said. Stock market is up. Bitcoin is up. The economy, for the most part, has over the last year, has gotten stronger than it has been in a long time. We're kind of coming out of inflation. We're not at that, 2% level that the Fed is looking for, but we're kind of getting there. And all I keep thinking is, all right, we still have that buyer instability. I just can't think that it's only related to interest rates. I mean, I know monthlies are important to buyers, but it can't just be that. Is it the constant change that we're going through, and now snap on top of that an election year, making people want to sit on the fence even more? I mean, it's like, if you need to do something, go out and do it.
Right, but I think we're very numbers focused in this room, but not enough psychology focused. I mean, I know that there are oftentimes I wake up, I look at the New York Times headlines on my phone, and I just get like a sense of dread.
It's emotional.
It's like there's just unease.
They have a way with titles, right?
There's just unease. Yep. You know what I mean? And unease affects every decision you make. Especially major life decisions like buying a home. So it's, the war in Gaza, all over, the election, Trump, it's all
global stuff.
But I'm no conspiracy theorist in any way, shape, or form. But I do think that, we're going to see rates come down.
Just in time.
For the election.
Agreed.
And
that's if we really talk about the presidential election,
that's
what it's about.
That's sort of where I was going with
what is real? What is real in New York? Like, it doesn't matter who's in the White House. There's only so much that New York State is going to create its own solutions or problems. Let's be optimistic and say they're going to create some solutions, right? But the only thing that can really happen on a federal level is the mortgage rates.
Right.
And even then, they're not determining the rates, they're just determining the Fed, and then it trickles down.
Correct.
So if I see it like stepping out, right? Look at mayoral elections. Often the real estate taxes don't move during mayoral elections if there's an incumbent. And here you're like, well, there's an incumbent who can be reelected. What's going to happen? It's pretty clear, we're going to see some mortgage rates in time for that.
I completely
agree. And that I think will drive our market forward.
I 1,000% agree with
more than anything else that happens.
I agree as well. But buying
That's
a home,
where I was going with the whole.
Buying a home is emotional, right? I mean, it's a financial,
so.
it's a financial situation, but it's a very emotional situation. But I also think, depending on, I guess, what side of the fence you sit on, right? You could say that states like New York, right, benefit in times of unease because we do have a very strong government that takes care of a lot of things, right? We have a lot of social programs in New York City or New York State. We have, a lot of protections, right? And people, if they're really concerned about the outcome of the election, they may come to New York.
And we have a massive economy.
Right. We also we have jobs and we have
our own.
Exactly.
Bigger than most countries in the world.
That's right. Significantly in the last year or so.
Right. Jobs have grown, population has grown. It may not have grown as much as some states, but it's still growing. It's not receding.
Correct.
Right? So, I think people look at these things during election years and they get even more emotional. And I agree with Peter. I think people do wake up in the mornings, they see a headline, they get a little bit paralyzed, right?
Well, they put the news on
and when they get
something.
paralyzed, it's really hard to make, for most people, the biggest financial decision in their life when they're concerned about, what might be happening in the Middle East, or what might be happening in Ukraine, or what's happening right here in our own country.
Yeah, and it's all significant things that are happening that I get,
And earlier you mentioned that that what usually happens is that people have money and they eventually need to spend it. They cannot
They can't
stop
sit on it.
themselves from spending it. So it's a question of
That's
is
very true.
the dread and the fear that is in the market, is it going to be overcome by the money burning a hole in your pocket that you got to put out there? And I think that the closer you get to the election, when everyone is just kind of done with it and said, like, no matter who wins, I don't think it's going to be great. So I'm ready to just move forward with my life.
I just want to move
So,
on. All right, we
yeah.
got to take a break. This is Talking New York Real Estate on the More Network. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
What do you really need to know about buying or selling a home? First, it's serious business. And it's complicated. There's a lot of money on the table, and emotion too. You need an agent who knows the ropes. So, whether you're buying or selling your home, work with professionals who have a mastery of the craft.
Okay, speaking of the $1 million in your pocket, Michael, so co-ops and condos, when you want to talk about value, okay, where are buyers finding more value these days, on the co-op side or on the condo side? I mean, condos we all know are 10% plus percentage higher for a whole bunch of reasons, but where are you seeing the most value? On what side of the fence?
I mean, I think from the condo sector, I would see, if I were out in the market to buy, I would think that, $2,500 a foot is a little bit too rich. But there's kind of a wave of, in particular in Midtown, I was thinking about this, is the buildings that came to market with, lots of amenities and high-end finishes that were in the last wave of new development. Which at some point were in the high teens and low 2000s, and some of them you can get for $1,600 a foot now. Those are 10-year-old buildings in Midtown in particular, where I think if you're able to get a unit closer to $1,600 a foot, that's a really good deal, because those were really going for $2,200 a foot at some point. So it's kind of like the second tier down from the brand new development. I think presents good value, and I think that with costs coming under control, although we've had a number of years of inflation, so we're talking about elevated costs, but not costs coming down yet. But I guess with stabilizing costs for renovation, that the good value is in older co-ops that are unrenovated, which I've seen some, again, kind of on the outskirts, Sutton Place, Beekman, some areas uptown, Morningside Heights, where you can get something for $700 a foot. And and if you can control the cost to renovate, then I think that's a really good
That's
buy-in
been a
level.
deterrent, though, recently, the cost of renovation for a lot of buyers.
Yeah, I think it's beginning to dissipate somewhat, because again, if you have inventory constrained, at some point you run out of options,
Right.
And you have to live somewhere. So it's either like, if you're one of these people who says, I don't want to rent anymore, I have to buy, then you're all out of options for renovated property. Either they're out of your reach on affordability, or they're just not enough of them and you keep losing out. And that kind of change or evolving market takes time. And that's why something that's unrenovated could be on the market for 9 months, 12 months, and not necessarily mispriced. And I get calls from agents all the time, is that I'm not getting any phone calls on this. And then I'll look at comps and say, I don't think the price is off. It's just that you need more time on the market, because it's going to take the buyer time to get around to the things that are renovated that they can't afford or that they're missing out on before they, get to the point where they say, all right, if I buy this and spend another $200 or $300 renovating, I'll still be ahead and I don't want to rent anymore, so I have to do it.
Correct. Steve, from a developer perspective, okay, what strategies can they utilize to attract more buyers and to navigate these sort of uncertain markets? Because as you indicated earlier, they're paying more interest on their loan and on their, cost to build, et cetera. But what kind of strategies are they picking up any of the closing costs as they were doing for a while, or is that kind of stopped? What's
Yeah, I
happening?
mean, developers are still, for the most part, picking up their own closing costs because they used to try to pass those closing costs onto the buyer, which was a brilliant concept that someone figured out a long time ago.
A long time ago.
But now the developers are paying, for the most part, their own transfer
buyers are
taxes.
happy to pay them.
They were
back in the
They
day.
were, but now the developers are paying their own transfer taxes. They're paying their own attorney fee. In some instances, they're paying the contribution to the resident managers unit, which we call RMU, which people sometimes see on a document and don't understand what it is. And even in some instances, I see developers picking up mansion tax or part of a mansion tax in order to kind of maintain value in the building for the other people that may have bought like a year or two ago when the market was a little bit busier. But then there's other incentives, as Peter was talking about earlier. You have common charges and real estate tax incentives, anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. I've seen it as high as 3. There are some developers out there that are offering teaser interest rates for a couple of years, buying down an interest rate to 3 or 4%. But those are usually short-term buy downs. My suggestion would be get a long-term buy down. So one of the best ways for a developer to maintain value and also help the buyer at the same time is to actually buy their interest rate down. So, and this is an approximate example. For if you were to reduce the price of an apartment $200,000, okay, in order to get the payment down to the same number, you may only have to subsidize the mortgage by $40,000 or $50,000. So a developer can save some money by subsidizing the mortgage interest rate, but make sure that buy down is a permanent buy down, not a 2 or 3 year buy down. I don't think those 2 or 3 year buy downs are beneficial to a buyer. 2 or 3 years goes really quickly. The typical New Yorker stays in their apartment 7, 8 years. So I like an interest rate buy down because I think that benefits a buyer much more and for a longer period of time. Getting just really quickly back to your question about the co-op market.
I have not seen that yet.
We've done it. Yeah,
that's really that's good. I like that.
We're really creative.
Yeah, that's really creative.
Also, and I'm not saying this just because it's our team, but you need to have a really good broker on site. Okay, you need to have a broker that understands the market, that understands the comps, that understands what other people are looking at, and that can really help the buyer and seller close a deal. Going back to the co-op market, I've always felt the co-op market is undervalued. I think the co-op market versus the condo market is very attractive if you can deal with a co-op board and you can deal with getting through a co-op board.
Well,
but if you can, there's a lot of benefits to owning in a co-op, frankly. The co-ops, historically also have lower carrying charges than a condominium because of the structure. They can finance their renovations and things like that. So I like the co-op market. The biggest question is, can you find someone to renovate it once you buy it?
I agree with you. I've owned both co-op and condo, and I agree with you on the co-op side. Let's talk about, we have a few minutes left, competition. So, we always, we're at the butt end of all the, the inflation jokes and the economy and whatever. The housing market is driving all of this, whatever behavior. What is our competition? I always think sometimes, looking at all these numbers and whatever, why don't you talk about another industry? Why is it always got to be the housing industry? And why is the housing industry, always so, bad and whatever else? Who else is our competition? By the way, and according to the people who listen to this show, it's a global phenomenon. It's not just a New York City thing. It's not just an American thing. It's a global phenomenon. When I look at the numbers and see people from all countries listening, I'm like, why? I mean, thank you. I love it. But it's like, why?
Well, it's also kind of funny, right? Like the politicians like to talk about inflation, but then they love to talk about how strong their housing markets are, right, in their states. So, like, you can't have it both ways, right? You can't have housing prices increase year over year and not have inflation. The two don't meet, right? So, our competition is other markets. It's not within our own market. And yes, there's natural competition within our own market. The competition is, can I do what I do in a less expensive housing market? So can I move to central New Jersey, right? Can I move to central Connecticut? Yeah. Can I move someplace where a housing stock is less expensive because I maybe don't have to be at work every day, or my sphere of influence isn't in that area? But if your job is here and your friends are here and your family's here, you're going to suck it up and live here. And you're going to pay to live here because it's still the best city in the world, even with the issues we face.
And pay a premium. And we did a story here a couple of weeks ago that said, millennials for the most part were not able to afford or not wanting to afford housing here in New York City. So they were moving to the Midwest. They were moving to Central Jersey or far out wherever because they can buy a home for $200,000 or less and live a grand lifestyle. And a lot of that is driven by the fact that they don't have to go to an office every day in New York City or anywhere. They can come and go if they need to. And then there was also a story a couple of weeks ago that we did on these tiny houses where millennials are spending like $10,000 on these little tiny like sheds in the backyard. My dad had one that was probably the size of, one of these tiny homes back when we were growing up. And I'm thinking, really? Okay.
Yeah. Container homes.
Container home, $10,000, and they're calling it a day. At least I can live where I want to, but only spend $10,000. And I think, all right, that's the competition right now. And eventually, because as all of you said, they can't not buy for too long. They can't sit on the fence for too long. That'll get old. Those houses will be too small. If you want to live in the Midwest, okay, good luck. But, maybe not going to work for a New Yorker who's going to miss this environment. Scott, what are you saying on that level?
There's so much to say.
You got 1 minute left. So are you losing people to these tiny homes or to these suburban neighborhoods or?
I mean, this is like, I think about the psychology of buying.
Because I'm not.
All the time. People move to New York, they rent, they have this fantasy of what life is going to be in New York, and it either works out or it doesn't. And so people will go back to where they were raised. They'll try something different. There'll be a job opportunity. We're getting help from cities like San Francisco that used to be competition, aren't as competitive anymore because quality of life there has maybe diminished. But New York is still great. So people want to be here, and it's sort of the general engine. It like spits people out. They move to the suburbs. Right now, there's no inventory in the suburbs in Connecticut, New Jersey, and so on. So
and
New
when
York
it does come on the market, it's gone in a couple of days.
Right. So there's this natural kind of there's a magnetic pull of New York, and over time it sort of spits an atom out and spits an atom out here and there. But I think really I really don't think New York. I'm a big fan of thinking like we don't have any competition. I think actually on the other side, like New York is awesome, and some people can over time like it'll be more affordable for some, less affordable for others, but ultimately people come back here when they've been successful and they raise their kids in Westchester. They want to come back, so that there's this big massive pool of people from everywhere who want to have a place.
That's right. There's always that.
It's funny what you just said reminds me of a story. I know somebody who lives in Singapore but was born in England. And when he visited New York, he said, everybody should live in New York for a period of time once in their life.
Agreed.
And, I don't know that anybody says that about any other city in the world.
That's true.
The epicenter of New York, the melting pot of the world, whatever. All right, we're going to come back in a minute or two with my thoughts of the week. Thank you, guys. Great conversation.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Okay, my thoughts for this week. The uncertainty in the New York City real estate market presents a dynamic landscape where challenges and opportunities intertwine. Economic fluctuations and shifting consumer preferences contribute to a climate of unpredictability, requiring buyers and sellers to navigate with caution and adaptability. While uncertainty introduces risks such as market volatility and affordability concerns, it also fosters innovation and strategic thinking among investors, developers, and real estate professionals. Despite the short-term challenges, the long-term outlook for the New York City real estate market remains resilient, driven by the city's enduring appeal, diverse economy, and robust demand. Successful navigation of uncertainty hinges on informed decision-making, meticulous market analysis, and a forward-thinking approach to capitalize on emerging trends and opportunities. Ultimately, these consumers who embrace uncertainty as a catalyst for growth and innovation are poised to thrive in one of the world's most dynamic real estate markets anywhere. And that's our broadcast for today. Thanks to my guests for being here on set with me. You can follow me on Facebook, Threads, Instagram, LinkedIn, or TikTok at Vince Rocco, or my website, thinkvince.com. And Einstein once said, compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. And to all of you around the world, from all of us here at Talking New York Real Estate on the More Network, thank you again for spending a part of your day with us. I will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.